Fake blood, Celeste clothing, an inflatable pool, cell phone evidence, someone getting kicked out of the courtroom. This is everything that happened in the morning session of day 3 of David's preliminary hearing. We are bringing back our reporter who is in the courtroom, and we're going to discuss it all right now. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Yeah, so as you just heard, there is a lot to get into as we talk about day 3 of this preliminary hearing for singer David. Remember, he is accused of sexually abusing, murdering, and dismembering 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez back in 2025. Her dismembered, decomposed remains reportedly found in the front trunk of a Tesla out in LA back in September of last year, a Tesla that was reportedly registered to the singer. So the question becomes for this preliminary hearing, does the prosecution have enough? Is the court going to determine that there is sufficient evidence to support these charges for this case to move forward against David?
2 plastic jugs of fake blood sitting in a garage next to real forensic swabs. And for 3 days, a Los Angeles courtroom has had to decide which one tells the truth. That's not a metaphor. That's an actual exhibit list from a preliminary hearing happening right now. Hold that image, because it's the entire case in miniature. A man who makes music videos soaked in fake blood, sitting feet away from lab reports about blood that might be real. Prosecutors say one explains the other. The defense says it's the opposite. And a judge, not a headline, gets to decide who's right. Before we go deeper into what the records actually show, make sure you're subscribed to the Crime Infinity, because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence. Here's what the public record shows so far. Musician D4vd is facing charges connected to the death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. According to court proceedings, her decomposed, dismembered remains were discovered inside the front trunk of a Tesla in a Los Angeles tow yard in September of last year, a vehicle reportedly registered to the defendant. This is day 3 of the preliminary hearing, the stage where a court decides not guilt, but whether there's enough evidence for this case to move to trial at all. That's a low bar. And according to those inside the courtroom, the prosecution appears determined to clear it by a wide margin. The day didn't start with testimony. It started with a judge losing patience. A reporter was reportedly removed from the courtroom for violating live transmission rules, a reminder that this court has been unusually strict about controlling what leaves the room in real time.
Fantastic. We get her notes in every day. They are so thorough. They are so specific. They're so detailed. Thank you so much for coming on. So first of all, before we even get into the substance, before we even talk about the demeanor of David, this court day started with fireworks. The judge was not happy. What happened?
Jesse, what a morning. We are in day 3 now of this preliminary hearing, and it started with a little bit of drama this morning. There was actually a reporter who was kicked out of the courtroom. The judge excluded her from today's proceedings because apparently there were live transmission rules that were violated. So this court has been very strict about preserving the integrity of this case. And we've talked about this before. Obviously, no cameras are allowed in that courtroom, no phones. You know, I'm not communicating with you guys, with really anybody in the outside world, as all of this is going down. And it's part of this larger, I think, respect of the integrity of this court. And the spirit of this court, because they want to ensure everything is done properly. Nobody here wants to risk any kind of mistrial, anything leaking that is not supposed to. So right now, during this court break, we can talk to you about what exactly went down.
And look, it's understandable. I mean, particularly when you're dealing with such a high-profile case like this and the sensitive nature of this.
No cameras, no phones. No outside contact during proceedings. That's not incidental. That's a court actively trying to prevent a case this combustible from leaking into a mistrial before it even reaches a jury. Then came a second removal. Private investigator Steve Fisher, hired, according to reporting, by the property owner where the defendant had been staying, was excluded from the witness list after prosecutors alleged he violated grand jury secrecy. He didn't fight it. He reportedly stood, acknowledged the request, and walked out. No argument. No scene. Just a quiet exit from a case he'd apparently been investigating from day one. What does it say about a case when the people closest to the evidence keep getting removed from the room? Now the substance, and it starts, oddly, with a weapon that may not be a weapon at all.
Okay, got it. All right, let's talk about the substance. So the first witness back on the stand was this criminalist, right? And being questioned by the defense. What happened there?
So we ended yesterday with the cross-examination of an LAPD criminalist. She was the one who was called to process evidence found in David's garage. And that evidence included everything from trash bags to rubber floor mats to bloodstains. She was the one who tested chainsaws found in David's house. This was just about a week after the car was found in the Hollywood tow yard with the victim's remains in the front trunk, of course. So they continued with that cross-examination, and there was a lot of back and forth about the chainsaws. And here's why. Defense attorney Blair Burke noted there was no positive test indicating the possibility of blood on those chainsaws, so she kept on asking this LAPD witness for the prosecution why they didn't take those chainsaws into evidence. It sounded like she wanted to make the point that touch DNA, which they didn't test for, may have indicated something else, may have painted a more comprehensive picture of what exactly happened and who may have been involved, who else may have been involved, that is. But the criminalist was very sharp, very clear with her answers. At one point yesterday, she even brought her notes back out to make sure that she gave precisely the information that was documented during this investigation. So she said there did not appear to be any kind of forensic value to those chainsaws that were found in the garage, and that's why they were not taken into evidence. So my big takeaway from all of this is that perhaps those were not the weapons or tools used for dismemberment, even though they were found in David's garage during this search.
Let me just clarify this point, just so it's clear for our audience. I heard there was reporting, maybe even testimony, about a missing chainsaw. I don't know if that's accurate.
Yeah.
And what about any evidence of a cleanup, including of the chainsaws? Correct me if I'm wrong about either of those points.
Correct on the first point. There was another chainsaw, a Makita brand chainsaw that we talked about the other day that was ordered online and delivered to David's house. As far as I know, from the evidence presented so far, that chainsaw was not located during this search. The two other chainsaws, and here's why the criminalist said there really was no forensic value. She testified earlier that had they been used for dismemberment, there would have been no way for blood to be cleaned up to the point where their testing did not indicate something of forensic value. So when they did that initial test on scene and there was no presumptive positive, they elected not to take those two chainsaws into evidence. But yes, there is a missing one. There is another one, and I'm sure that's going to come up later in this testimony.
And in terms of a cleanup at all, I know that there's a whole big back and forth yesterday about whether it's actually blood, possibly blood. Anything about a cleanup?
Investigators recovered chainsaws from the defendant's garage. According to testimony from an LAPD criminalist, none of them tested positive for blood, and none showed forensic value consistent with use in dismemberment. That sounds, on the surface, like a gap in the prosecution's case. It might be, or it might point somewhere else entirely, because according to that same testimony, there's a chainsaw that's never been found at all. A Makita, ordered online, delivered to the defendant's address, and, as far as the evidence presented shows, never recovered in the search. An object that exists on a receipt but not in an evidence locker. That's the kind of detail that doesn't resolve a case. It just relocates the question. What the search did produce was smaller and arguably more damning. A double-bagged trash bag in the garage, containing wipes with a brownish stain. According to testimony, those wipes tested positive for the possible presence of blood, not confirmed, not conclusive, but enough to keep the theory of a cleanup alive. Paired with that, Forensic analysis of a blue inflatable pool cross-referenced against fragments of blue plastic recovered during the victim's autopsy. According to testimony, those fragments were matched, piece by piece, to damage patterns on the pool itself, linear cuts, examined under a microscope, laid out in court like a puzzle nobody wanted solved.
David's garage.
Now, here's something interesting. Somebody will listen to this and say, really? So we are not 100% sure what was maybe used to dismember her body. I don't believe we have the alleged murder weapon. This feels like problems for the prosecution. However, I read your notes today. There was a very important back and forth, a very important piece of testimony regarding this blue inflatable pool and how this potential purchase by David of this pool, how it matches up to what was found with Celeste's remains. Can you talk to us about that testimony today?
This, Jesse, is visibly, to me, a non-expert, irrefutable. We heard from another criminalist from LAPD. She did the actual forensic analysis of the inflatable pool, in addition to material that was sent to her by the LA County Medical Examiner's Office that was collected during the victim's autopsy. Now, that includes, I mentioned her soiled clothing, and bits of blue plastic found during the autopsy that were essentially embedded in her remains. So this criminalist actually pieced those bits of blue plastic in with the rest of the inflatable pool that she processed and analyzed, including work that was done under a microscope. And there were exhibits shown during court today, photos of how those pieces from the autopsy fit in like a puzzle with the rest of that blue inflatable pool. So there was a bit of back and forth. The prosecutor spent quite a bit of time questioning this witness, Lisa Lehendro from LAPD, about her background, her expertise, how she did this work, and what it showed. They described the linear cuts in the pool, exactly where in the pool she noted them. There were 4 different areas of damage, what she found on the underside of the pool, and how this all fits in with the larger picture that's being painted, which is that Celeste may have been dismembered in this pool.
Taking a step back before we get in more into the substance of the testimony, I saw something in your notes regarding this specific moment as they're talking about this, the remains, as they're talking about the last clothes worn by Celeste. Her family was there today, right? Her family was there today listening to all this. What was their reaction to it?
This is the moral center of the case, and it's worth saying once, clearly. A 14-year-old's remains were used to reconstruct a timeline no child should ever be part of. That's not commentary. That's the exhibit list. Her mother was in the courtroom for it. According to those present, she sat through testimony about her daughter's soiled clothing, her cut leggings, the biological evidence recovered from the search. And this time, unlike the visible grief reported on day 1, witnesses described her as still, frozen. There's a version of pain that doesn't show up as tears, and courtroom observers say that's what this looked like. Then the case shifted from garages to geography, and this is where the evidence stopped being about cleanup and started being about movement.
Get into something that I have been waiting for, the digital evidence. So if we recall,
Right.
the prosecution has claimed that David lured Celeste to his home out in LA, right, on that April night back in 2025. And, I'm wondering if we're going to hear about Uber receipts and things like that, but the cell phone tracks people. The cell phone tracks people's location. This has been critical because today we finally learned about the geolocation data of David's cell phone, right? So talk to us about that testimony from this morning.
This is fascinating, and if you're somebody who likes to nerd out on data, this is going to be the most interesting part of this testimony for you. Now, I had questions when I first read some of the charging documents about why in the world anybody would take their own car, especially a car tricked out with software like a Tesla, to do anything anything that might be criminal. And on top of that, not just their car, but their iPhone. So right now, right before we broke for lunch, we were hearing LAPD testimony from their expert who analyzed not only the Tesla data, but David's cell phone data. So we're actually seeing maps right now where this expert is pinpointing where the vehicle, according to data they analyzed, traveled from the Hollywood Hills west along Sunset Boulevard and then north up the coast into Santa Barbara County. He's testifying how the path of that Tesla, again, according to his analysis of data, matches the path of David's iPhone. Same time, same day, same location. And he's testifying how that matches up with where Celeste's passport card was later found, right by Lake Cachuma off of State Road 154 in Santa Barbara County. Now, this is interesting, too. This has come up before in charging documents, but he's testifying both the vehicle data and the phone data show additional trips up there after that first road trip on April 24th of 2025. And that's, of course, the morning after, or overnight, going into the morning after the victim was allegedly killed.
According to testimony, cell phone geolocation data and Tesla trip data were both presented in court, and according to the analyst who reviewed them, they matched. Same route, same day, same timing, tracing a path from the Hollywood Hills west along Sunset Boulevard, then north into Santa Barbara County, to the same general area where the victim's passport card was later recovered. According to that testimony, the data shows the trip wasn't a one-time event. There were additional trips north in the days after the date prosecutors say the victim was killed. A car and a phone, moving together again and again toward the same stretch of road. If two machines can tell the same story independently, how much room is left for coincidence? But here's the part serious legal analysts are watching closest, and it's the part prosecutors haven't answered yet. Nothing presented so far, according to the record, actually shows how Celeste Rivas Hernandez died. No footage of the act itself. No eyewitness to the killing. What's been presented is circumstantial. Purchases of burn cages, fireproof mats, body bags, and trash bags, made under a false name, all dated after the day prosecutors allege the murder occurred. That builds a picture of concealment. It does not, on its own, build a picture of the killing.
Let me ask you a big picture question as I'm hearing this testimony from today and the last few days. It seems that a lot of the focus has been so far on the alleged cleanup, the dismemberment, the cleanup, trying to get rid of the evidence of this alleged killing.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions I've been getting from legal analysts is, what has been the evidence that he actually murdered her? And what do I mean by that? A, the evidence that he actually killed her, that he stabbed her to death, and that he murdered her, right? Not that this was a case of manslaughter, not that this was a case of self-defense. So far in this preliminary hearing, what has stood out to you as the evidence that he murdered her?
None. There has not been any. This is circumstantial evidence. And what you pointed out the other day, Jesse, is that many of these incriminating Amazon and Home Depot purchases that were made online under a fake name for items like burn cages, fireproof mats, chainsaws, body bags, trash bags, they were not made until after April 23rd, again, the day of her alleged murder. So we haven't seen anything like home security video showing the actual killing. We have not heard from any witnesses who testified about being there and actually seeing this go down. We've heard a lot about why he may have done it, right, for financial gain. We've heard a lot about cleanup and cover-up efforts, including this road trip that is supported by data from both the car and the phone. But evidence about the murder itself and how it was carried out, where I think we're all waiting to see where that goes and what additional intel the prosecution has.
Well, here's the way I would look at it. I'm curious if the medical examiner is going to testify today or tomorrow. And if the medical examiner testifies, or people from the medical examiner staff testify, that she died from 2 penetrating wounds, So now you're saying, okay, she was killed. If they also match that up with text messages, which we haven't heard from yet, as far as I know, right? Messages between David and Celeste leading up to this night in April. If they can show they were fighting, if they can show she was going to expose him, and then he lures her there, gets her an Uber, and that there's no more activity from her cell phone after that night in April. He doesn't reach out to her, although I understand today there was a test, there was evidence today about him, about that phone call, so talk about that. But I think that's what we're looking for next. Maybe they started with the relationship, they started with the cover-up, and then they may move into the actual killing. Because look, at the end of the day, if they're saying, you know, she went to his place, there's all this evidence of potentially dismemberment there, what else do you think happened? Although, you know, is this a slam dunk or not? So just, I mean, that's my thought. You know, you can jump, you tell me what you think about it if you're here.
A cover-up with no confirmed crime attached to it yet. That's the gap the prosecution still has to close, potentially through the medical examiner, whose report reportedly remains partially sealed by court order, a detail that itself raises the temperature of everything still to come. And then, almost as a footnote that isn't a footnote at all, a phone call. According to testimony, the defendant's phone placed an outgoing call to the victim's phone roughly half an hour to an hour after the vehicle began its route north. The defense objected when a detective seemed to attribute that call directly to the defendant rather than the device, a distinction the court record now reflects. But the implication, whether intentional or not, sits there anyway, a call placed to a phone that, according to the prosecution's timeline, could no longer be answered.
But the call, I think, was interesting today too, right? This alleged call that he made to Celeste.
That was interesting, and defense attorneys actually jumped in to object during that portion of testimony. It was sustained because they wanted to make sure the court record stated that, you know, the LAPD detective isn't testifying that David, the defendant, made a call. They wanted to make sure the court record stated his phone made that outgoing call. But that call was placed about half an hour to an hour after the Tesla got on the road heading north towards Santa Barbara County. So again, that speaks to the alleged cleanup and cover-up efforts. If he did in fact murder this girl, and if he was in fact on the way up to Lake Kachuma to dump evidence, why in the world would he call her phone? Of course, she's not going to pick up. She's dead in his house. So again, part of the cover-up, part of the alleged cover-up, we did hear chatter about the LA County medical examiner potentially testifying today. That has not happened yet. I'm curious to see if that happens, and I'm very curious to hear from him. It's Dr. Ode Ukpo. And what's significant here is that after the autopsy was conducted last fall, LAPD actually filed a motion. They initiated this motion to place additional details from this autopsy under seal, essentially gagging the coroner, the medical examiner leading this case. He did make a statement before that about the state of decomposition and the fact that the victim must have been in that car for quite some time. Beyond that, beyond the report that was issued, we have not heard from the medical examiner yet, so a lot of questions for him. We have heard that may happen today, but we're going to hear from at least 2 additional witnesses, so we'll see who the prosecution decides to call to the stand.
That's the second time this case turns on an object doing the talking instead of a person. First a chainsaw that isn't there, now a phone call to someone who can't pick up. Which brings us back to where we started, the fake blood. According to testimony, LAPD's forensic team tested the jugs and jars recovered from the garage, and the material came back negative, not blood at all. The defense has reportedly pointed to this as evidence of a mundane explanation. Merchandise production, stage props, music video material, nothing more.
There was something that we haven't even talked about yet. And by the way, what I'm about to get into is something that has been speculated about where the defense may go. How do you explain these unusual purchases? How do you explain the potential of what appears to be brown stains or blood in the home? What we're about to talk about happened today. You even highlighted in your notes. This is a new piece of information.
Yeah.
This seems to be where the defense is saying there could be some sort of alternative explanation. So, Julia, what happened today? What was the defense trying to suggest?
If you've been following this case online, you've probably seen clips of David's music videos, especially the ones where he's dressed in a white t-shirt with fake bloodstains. So this came up today in court, and it was the first time I've heard it during this preliminary hearing. Apparently, one of the LAPD criminalists found jugs and jars of fake blood in David's garage. Now, they didn't get into, how much of it was there, but the defense did state that there was some merchandising activity going on in David's garage, meaning they were making music merch, and that could have been, t-shirts and sweatshirts stained with fake blood. So does that explain all the evidence that was documented and collected? No, absolutely not. But it does explain the fake blood. And how did they know it was fake? LAPD did have their forensic team go out there and test it. It came back negative. It was not taken into evidence. But I think the presence of that in David's garage does set up, a new narrative for the defense to potentially seize.
Yeah, I was always wondering, are they going to say, "Oh, this was for a music video," right? We've heard all this for a music video. So this is a complicating factor. Even if this case moves forward to trial, you're wondering if they're going to have some room for reasonable doubt. Look, interesting things are happening. Your reporting has been great. I know you have to jump back into that courtroom.
Thank you.
Julia Deng, thank you so much for taking the time as always.
It's a real answer to one piece of evidence. It is not, on its own, an answer to the wipes, the pool fragments, or the geolocation data. But it's the first real crack the defense has tried to drive into the prosecution's wall. And how a jury might one day weigh that crack is a very different question than how a judge weighs it now, at the probable cause stage. The record is not finished. There's no verdict here, no confession, and under the law, D4vd remains presumed innocent unless and until prosecutors prove otherwise in a courtroom built for exactly that purpose, not in a comment section, and not in a video like this one. What the record shows, so far, is a timeline built almost entirely out of objects: a pool, a phone, a trash bag, a car, a chainsaw that isn't where it should be. Whether those objects add up to proof, or simply to suspicion dressed as evidence, is the question this hearing still has to answer. If you want to look past our framing and read this for yourself, the preliminary hearing transcripts and the original charging documents in this case are part of the public court record and searchable through official Los Angeles County Court channels. Read the criminalist's actual testimony on the pool fragments. Then tell us in the comments, does circumstantial evidence this dense amount to proof, or is the prosecution still missing the one piece that actually shows how she died? If this case raised more questions than it answered, that's exactly why this channel exists. Like this video, share it with someone who follows these cases as closely as you do. Subscribe to the Crime Infinity and turn on notifications, because the next file we open might be sitting in a courthouse you've never heard of, waiting for someone to finally read it out loud.